Welcome, everyone. Today's program is with Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is here to discuss her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. I want to thank you all for being here with us today. Donna Scow will be my host for today's program. I'm Kate Trinka, the Global Read Coordinator with the Charter for Compassion. I'm so excited to be with Robin and Donna today. There's so much richness here in this book. I think we should have scheduled a 2-hour session, but we won't. We'd like to thank all of our generous donors who continue to make it possible for today's program to be offered to you at no charge. We do have a 3-tiered program for sponsorship, and would especially like to thank a very special anonymous donor who donated $500 and is our cover sponsor for today's read. Thank you so much. If you're interested in sponsoring an upcoming global read, please contact me at kate@charterforcompassion.org. The Charter's Education Institute has a bunch of different courses. There's one coming up in January with Gujan Bergman called Our Shared Humanity, Finding Common Ground in a Divisive World. And then in February, we have a program called Digital Citizenship. So hope you can join us there. That would be wonderful. Next month, we are honored to have with us award-winning poet Naomi Nye, featuring her book of 100 poems called Voices in the Air. This book celebrates the inspirational people who strengthen and motivate us to create, to open our hearts, and to live rewarding and graceful lives. We're excited about our growing slate of authors who will be joining us for 2021. We will be announcing those very soon. The links to all these programs I've just been talking about will be available in the chat room. I can't tell you how grateful we are to these amazing authors, obviously including Robin, who have connected with the Charter for Compassion and are willing to donate their time to us. Please help us to spread the word. So again, welcome to today's program with Robin Wall Kimmerer. I encourage you to participate in this book discussion today by using the chat room. It's located at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type your questions in there, and I'll get them to Robin during the last portion of our program. Thanks to the Charter for Compassion who's hosting this program for us. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you my co-host for today's program, Donna Scow. Donna is pleasantly retired to pursue the gift of time, free quietness, reflecting, and wonder. All of this after serving for over 40 years as a registered nurse, specializing in hospice and palliative care, serving her AIDS, geriatric, and neurology patients with love and compassion. Donna, with her gift of time, enjoys the outdoors with her greatest love being the art of fly fishing. She also creatively enhances the world through her weaving, quilting, landscaping, gardening, her sense of humor, and most of all, her most generous act of all is her sacred listening. Welcome, Donna, and thanks so much for being on this journey with me.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce our esteemed guest. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a mother, scientist, decorated professor, and enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. She is the author of this book that we're featuring today, which has earned her wide acclaim and is currently #9 on the New York Times bestseller list. Her first book, Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses, was awarded the John Burroughs Medal for Outstanding Nature Writing, and her other work has appeared in Orion, Whole Terrain, and numerous scientific journals. She tours widely and has been featured on NPR's On Being with Krista Tippett, and in 2015 addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations on the topic of healing our relationship with nature. As a writer and a scientist, her interests in restoration include not only restoration of ecological communities, but restoration of our relationships to the land. She holds a BS in botany from SUNY ESF, an MS, a master's and PhD in botany from the University of Wisconsin, and is author of numerous scientific papers on plant ecology, bryophyte ecology, traditional knowledge, and restoration ecology. As a writer and scientist, her interests in restoration include not only restoration of ecological communities, but restoration to our relationship to land. She lives on an old farm in upstate New York, tending gardens, both cultivated and wild. I'm going to turn my video on. Welcome, Robin. It is such an honor to be able to spend this time with you. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I think you have something to share with us right off the top. So handing it over to you.
Miigwech, Kate and Donna, for creating this opportunity for community around a book. What could be better? So I really appreciate all of the work that you do and everybody listening, because it's our shared work. I want to greet you first with our traditional protocol greeting in Potawatomi language. I'll say, Bojo Jayak, Shabadaskikish Kokwena Deshnakos. Bodwe Wadmi Kwenda, Megazedo dem Minwa Makodo dem, Shishibanyek Nebendigwes, Syracuse, New York, Maple Nation, Onondaga Aki, Nidochbia, Miigwech Bizendawiag. And I don't speak much of our beautiful Potawatomi language, but we're asked to try to share it whenever we can, because our languages are endangered species, which we're bringing back to life. And in my language, I told you that my name's Robin Kimmerer, my Potawatomi name, Shabadaske Gish Kokwe. I live here in the territory of the Onondaga people, in the heart of what I think of as Maple Nation, the beautiful hills and farms and sugar maple forests of upstate New York that stretch all the way to our co-hosts in Wisconsin. We are all women of Maple Nation. I also want to just give gratitude for this beautiful day, for the chance that we have to be together, for our work, for a breath of air, for a drink of cool water, for birds outside the window, and for each other. And gratitude for the First Peoples in whose homelands each of us sit, to whom we owe a debt of history and land, and certainly of teachings of how we might live well on this beautiful earth. And what I thought I might do to start off with is to do a short reading that comes from the introduction to the brand new edition of Braiding Sweetgrass. There's a beautiful new edition that has been made with, it has woodcut art in it and just gorgeous paper. It's new out from Milkweed. I'm so grateful that they did this. And I got to write a new introduction for it. And so I'm going to read to you just a little bit from that introduction. Those of you who know the book already will find themes that connect to what you already know. And if you don't know, I think you'll still find it, I hope, accessible and provocative. So let me bring that up and I'll share that with you. Okay. I began writing Braiding Sweetgrass in what seems, from this moment, in the midst of a global pandemic and the upheavals it has generated, a more innocent time, when climate catastrophe was a hot glow on the horizon. We could smell smoke, but our home was not yet engulfed in flames. There was guarded optimism for leadership on climate change and justice for land and people, human and otherwise. A lot has happened since in climate urgency, with the political pain of vile Wendigos come to office and all the wounds they have inflicted. I don't need to say more. This evidence might suggest that the medicine of plant stories has not worked very well to heal our relationships with land and with each other. The powerful purveyors of destruction are still in power, and the skies are darkening. But as always, I take my guidance from the forests, who teach us something about change. The forces of creation and destruction are so tightly linked that sometimes we can't tell where one begins and the other leaves off. A long-lived overstory can dominate the forest for generations, setting the ecological conditions for its own thriving, while suppressing others by exploiting all the resources with self-serving dominance. But all the while, it's setting the stage for what happens next. And something always happens, something that is more powerful than that overstory. A fire, a windstorm, a disease. Eventually, the old forest is disrupted and replaced by the understory, by the buried seed bank that has been readying itself for this moment of transformation and renewal. A whole new ecosystem rises to replace that which no longer works in a changed world. Braiding Sweetgrass, I hope, is part of that understory, seeded by many thinkers and many doers, filling the seed bank with diverse species so that when the canopy falls, as it surely will, a new world is already rising. New and ancient, with its origins in the indigenous worldview of right relation between land and people. What the overstory of colonialism tried to suppress is surging. It is the prophesied time of the seventh fire, a sacred time when the collective remembering will transform the world. A dark time and a time filled with light. We remember those oft used words of resistance. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. It's as if we can see the world we want to live in just over time's horizon, and the question is, how do we get there? It's a question familiar to the plant sweetgrass. Unable to leave one place and travel to a better one by seed, Key relies on humans to carry rhizomes, the ones who can easily cross distance and boundaries, who know that whatever we wish to see on the other side of the narrows of this ecological and cultural crisis, we must pass lovingly from hand to hand. The mythic story of Sky Woman falling is the heartbeat of Braiding Sweetgrass. It's both the opening and the closing, enfolding the stories between. The version shared in that first edition is the most widely told account of the epic, but it's not the only one. There's always the deep diving muskrat and the earth on Turtle's back. The rescue by the geese and the gifts of the animals are constant, as are the seeds that Sky Woman brings, initiating the covenant of reciprocity between newcomer humans and our ancient relatives. The detail that varies from one version told to another is just how Sky Woman finds herself falling from one world to the next. The common version, and the one in the first edition, is that she slips, the earth giving way at the edge of the hole in the sky where the great tree of life had fallen. It's an accident with mythic consequences, and so it begins. But in other tellings, this was no accident. In one version, she was pushed. In another, she was thrown, not from malice, but because she was needed for the sacred task, and she needed help in leaving her beloved home for the next. In every version I've ever heard, Sky Woman was an accidental and possibly unwilling traveler to the next world, like a seed on the wind. But you know, as I look around at the strong women I know, indigenous and newcomers, survivors and thrivers, teachers, artists, farmers, singers, healers, mothers, nokos, aunties, daughters, sisters, holding together families and communities and leading the way to the new world, I have a hard time seeing our Sky Woman as an unknowing and passive emissary. No, I see her standing at the edge of the hole in the sky, her belly planted with new life, looking down into the darkness. Guided by the shaft of dazzling light shining through, she catches a glimpse of the world that waits for the seeds she carries, plucked from the tree of life. With all humility and respect for the teachings of this sacred story, I can't help my imagining forward to this moment on the circle of time. What if, with full agency, she spreads her arms, looks over her shoulder, feels her child stir within, and then What if she jumps? She is a woman with a duty to safeguard life, just as women have done throughout our painful history, carrying life through times of starvation and disease, on the long walks of removal, hiding children from the boarding schools and embracing the ones who come back, fighting pipelines, protecting water, saving the seeds, learning the language, holding the ceremonies, honoring the earth. Sky Woman's descendants are not women who would step away from the edge if it meant the protection of life. As a society, we know we stand at the brink. We know we do. Through the hole that opens at our feet, we can look down and see a glittering blue and green planet, as if from the vantage point of space, vibrating with birdsong and toads and tigers. We could close our eyes, keep breathing poison air. We could witness the extinction of our relatives and continue to measure our worth by how much we take. We could cover our ears to our own knowing. We could back away from the edge and retreat to the gray decline. But in this time of transformation, when creation and destruction wrestle like Sky Woman's mythic grandsons, gambling with the future of the earth, what would it take for us to follow Sky Woman, to jump to the new world, to co-create it? Do we jump because we look over our shoulders at the implacable suffering marching toward us and jump from fear and portent? Or perhaps we look down, drawn toward the glittering green, hear the bird song, smell the sweetgrass, and yearn to be part of a different story, the story we long for, the story that we are beginning to remember, the story that remembers us. What does it take to abandon what does not work and take the risks of uncertainty? We'll need courage. We'll need each other's hands to hold and faith in the geese to catch us. It would help to sing. The landing might not be soft, but the land holds many medicines. Propelled by love, ready to work, we can jump toward the world we want to co-create with our pockets full of seeds. Miigwech. Mi'u.
Oh my goodness. I've got the goosies all over my body right now. Thank you so much. Beautiful. Absolutely.
Want to jump, doesn't it? Hold hands and jump.
I'm in. I'm in. I think I've already jumped.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, Kate. Maybe that if we've already jumped, how do we beckon to the others? Yeah.
And I mean, I can't, when is this edition out? Is it out now? Is it?
It is out now. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay, good. I want to pick that up just for that introduction for sure. Obviously, I have my own book right here, but like, oh, I want to just have that. So my first question is like, why did you write this book? Like, why now? And did you have a hopeful outcome for it? And you may have just answered it in this new introduction, but could you speak to, why you decided to write this book? Why now? And then, or why when you wrote it? Obviously, it's a little, it wasn't yesterday, but
Right. The easy answer is why did I write it is because I couldn't help myself. I have been so privileged, blessed really, to have spent my life with plants and with so many teachers, indigenous and plant and teachers of all sorts. And it felt really important to offer the medicine of plants and indigenous teachings in a time when we need them so badly. There are, yeah. So I wrote it as a way of trying to share the medicines that had been shared with me. And in our language, our word for medicine, mishkikin, actually means the strength of the earth. And so it felt like my responsibility to use the gifts of language and story and listening to plants to be part of that strength of the earth. But to your point, I didn't write it in this moment. The book came out in 2013, and has had quite a life of its own, in a very surprising way.
Thank you. Did you have an outcome? Did you have a hopeful outcome for it? Or it's just something that you needed to do?
It was something I needed to do, but my hope was that it could be an invitation to people to remember the love of the earth and the love that they have for earth. I am, I've been part of the environmental movement really my whole life, since the first Earth Day and before. And I have often been frustrated by the fact that oftentimes our environmental rhetoric is about, well, changing technology and changing policies and changing tax structures. All those things are important. I don't want to minimize them at all, but hardly anybody talks about that we need to change ourselves, that we live with a worldview which is inherently alienating with the living world. And right, embodied in indigenous cultures all around the world is another worldview that invites people to be good for the earth, not the enemy. And so it's important to shine a light on that, just as an invitation to people to be part of this great remembering of who we could be in the world. And it's so gratifying to hear from people who say, I remember that too.
Thank you. Thank you.
I say that when you just spoke, it's like music, and you write about the Sky Woman's story, and I sit at the foot of my elder teachers listening for their songs. I feel that now, that I'm listening to you, but I'm thinking of our children and the stories and the storyteller that I feel is missing. That the example of here we have a disrespect for science now.
Right.
Yes. And hearing the children, or wanting the children to hear these stories in awe. Where do you think where the disrespect of science now came from?
Boy, I wish I could answer that question. I think because science sometimes challenges what our very self-centered selves think we ought to have or want or be. We don't like necessarily what science brings us. We like it when it brings us cures and technology and good things. But when it says, you human people are not the only ones here. You human people are in fact subject to the same natural laws that govern maple trees and water and soil. That's not a message that sits well with us because of our worldview of human exceptionalism. We really do think that many of us that we are sitting at the top of some biological hierarchy, and all the rest of the world is stuff. And all that stuff belongs to us. It's a denial of the personhood of the rest of the world, of the intelligence of the rest of the world. And but the denial of science, oh, I I don't know. I don't know. It's also perhaps, well, not just perhaps, it is certainly tied up with the very poor science literacy that we have. And thinking that science is all about fill in the blank answers as opposed to creative problem solving about questions that engage us all. So there's certainly part of that.
Yeah.
Thank you. If I could just say about the story, the three sisters and the plants growing and how they all are intertwined. And I would love to bring children out there and show them, how this is versus, you talk about the commodity of the land and what we're doing to the land, but the beauty of how each plant is helping each other. Is there a lack for our children to see this and the beauty of the land and plants?
Oh gosh, yeah. We know that as a nation, we suffer from what has been so wisely called nature deficit disorder.
Mm,
That when we spend most of our time indoors in built environments, we've we don't we're not accessing those teachers who are around us. And so you do have to be in the presence of the teacher, but you don't have to be on the shore of a wilderness lake for those teachers to be there. You know, they're in your backyard, they're in your garden, they're in a handful of seeds. And but I think it takes the mindset that I know that you have and share, which is that the world could teach us.
mm,
Um, you could have all the teachers around you, but if you don't know their teachers, you're not going to be able to listen. So I just love the notion that every one of us, that is something that every one of us could do, is to go be with the teacher, be outside with that openness to say, what what am I learning here? What could I learn? It takes patience. It takes unlearning the idea that what could this moss have to teach me? Yeah, it takes humility. Um, and I hear from a lot of parents, for example, say, well, I would like to do that, but I don't know myself what the teachings are. Well, how do you think people learned? They sat there patiently and, full of curiosity and questions, and they learned. And besides, it's fun. Um,
mm.
there's all those teachers there. Engage with them, see what you can learn, um, and and be in communion with them.
That that's amazing. And I think too, it sort of relates to one of the questions that I had. Like, it's related to the Thanksgiving address that you mentioned in your book, and which I have in my entryway of my house and my cabin. I was unaware of the much longer version that you included in your book, which is so rich and so beautiful. I was curious about, like, after each call of gratitude, the people are called to respond with, now our minds are one. Um, First, can you speak about this beautiful way of greeting the world, the power of the call and response, and then how this sets the stage for the school day, not only for the students, but for the teachers themselves?
Mm. There's so much power in the Thanksgiving address, both the way I shared in the book and in so many other practices of Thanksgiving, that are practiced every day, not just one day a year, in the world. And I think that part of their power and part of the call and response is because it calls attention. We have so many other things on our mind, all about our own issues, our own conflicts, our joys, and our sorrows, and they fill our minds. But this is a call to say, wait, those things are true. We will get to them. Why? Gratitude is also called the words that come before all else. Um, and say, against everything that we face, can we be grateful for water? Yes, we can. It's the call and response. Yes, I am grateful for water. Can I be grateful for that breath of air, for the presence of birds, for the foods that sustain me, for the moon, for the sun, for stars in the sky? And it's so important that it's long. It's a long inventory of all of the gifts we are given. And by the time you get to the end of it, you just feel so rich and cared for. You remember that you have everything you need, and you have affirmed in community, yes, we are in agreement about the value of clean water. And so when you're done, then you turn to whatever issue might be occupying your minds, and you get to work on it. But you do it with a sense of abundance. You do it with a sense of compassion for one another, because we have said, yes, this is common ground. This is something we share. And now we can talk about whatever the issue is. But we're coming with what the Haudenosaunee call good mind. Um, and so by creating that common ground, by starting the day with the Thanksgiving, by starting meetings with the Thanksgiving, especially hard conversations with the Thanksgiving, I think creates the common ground from which better solutions flow, and certainly more compassion for one another and for the more than human persons as well.
Thank you. That's beautiful. I like that it, like you said, it calls attention to the abundance that we have in our lives, and then that sets the stage for being able to have the resilience to deal with the things that we're bringing from our own lives. That's beautiful. I've been really sort of on the top of my radar lately is the sense of belonging, and how it's so important. Um, uh, and you mentioned that your students said that nature was a place where they experienced the greatest sense of belonging and well-being. But then when you asked if the earth loved them back, there was no response. How do people develop the awareness that the earth loves them in return? And what do you think is causing that disconnect?
I think at the root of that disconnect, which is so palpable when you ask people that question, they're like, well, if the earth loved me back, that would mean saying that the earth had agency. That would mean that the earth was a living being. That would mean that the earth is not a warehouse full of commodities. So it challenges the entire Western worldview to say the earth loves me back. So I get the pause, like, oh, wait a minute, this is revolutionary. And so I think that's what underpins it. But then when you open yourself to, well, wait a minute, how does my mother love me? She feeds me, right? She takes care of me. She teaches me. She brings me beauty. She lets me know the consequences of my inappropriate actions. All of the things that we know that our mothers do because they love us. Well, think about it. That's exactly what Mother Earth is doing as well. But we just call it stuff. We just call it natural phenomena. But in the mindset of the agency and the not just metaphorical thinking about Mother Earth, or as many of in our cultures will say, Grandmother Earth. You know, if you really accept that grandmother role, she's not a human. We're not saying that this is a human. We're saying it's another kind of person. And so I love the land loving us back because it just has the potential to pull the rug out from underneath all of those assumptions about the fact that we think of the earth as nothing more than natural resources, not as our mother.
And that's perfect lead into like this language of animacy, moving from it to her or him or something. Don't you think that ties into this then? Can you speak more about the language of animacy for those people who aren't maybe as familiar with it?
Oh, I'd love to, because they're all connected. It's all connected.
Exactly.
Yeah. With this idea of the earth as stuff, as commodity, in the English language, if you interrogate our own language, we wouldn't, Kate and Donna, we would not refer to each other as it, right?
Right.
It's so rude. It takes your personhood. It's disrespectful. In English, we never say it about members of our own species, but we say it about everyone else. The birds, the beetles, the trees, the rivers, they're all it. And I think that's no mistake. English is the language of capitalism. It's the language of objects. And subtly, maybe not so subtly, it gives us
Mhm.
permission to think about the world as our own property, as it's just stuff. It doesn't, we can do whatever we want. It puts the earth outside of our circle of compassion because it's just stuff. And so, as some of you know, in the Potawatomi language, and indeed in many other indigenous languages, it's not possible to speak of living beings as it's. They have their own grammar of respect, which I refer to as the grammar of animacy. We still have words for objects, paper clips, bulldozers, the call those it, but we would never say it about a tree, and we'd never say it about a fox. We just wouldn't, because it's disrespectful. So again, with this theme of how can we make medicine for this broken relationship with the world, thought, well, what if we could start having pronouns in English that allow us to escape it, so that we don't have to look out the window and say that blue jay, it is on the tree. So working with, well, mostly with listening to the land and bringing this question to my language teacher. So, well, do we have a word in Potawatomi for just a living being? And not a thing, a being. And he said, yeah, we have a beautiful word, Bamadezi Ki, an earth life, an earth being. And but I knew that Bamadezi Aki would not slip easily into English. But the last part of that word, Aki, is what means the earth. And what about the last part of that, Ki? So I've proposed this new pronoun that we do have he and she and it in the English language, but lacking a word for beings of the earth. Could we use ki, ki? And that has wonderful resonance because it's also a word which is used in many other languages to refer to life energy, right? And other sorts of concepts. So I look at that ojindis, that blue jay outside, and I would say, ki is speaking to me right now, calling to me. And then in English, we already have the word that we could use for the plural, and we'll just add an N to that KI and talk about kin. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
So I think of these pronouns as the pronouns of the revolution for all the reasons that you've suggested, because they bring us to this new awareness that we are not alone here.
I love it because I've written about this language of animacy, maybe not called it that, but shifting from it to something else and struggling with this pronoun that you just mentioned. I love this. I was using HIR because, but it translates visually, but certainly doesn't translate audially because it just sounds like HER, or unless you said it differently, like maybe here or something. But I love that key to with the N is kin, because that's what we all are, right? I mean, with one another, if we're really connected to the world, not just physically, but spiritually, mentally, emotionally, all of those ways.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that forward. let's make it happen.
Robin, while you're speaking about this, it brings up a part that I love when you were talking about the Cheyenne elder, Bill Tall Bull, and about the language. You had no need of language for which to speak the plants and the places that I love. They love to hear the old language, he said. It's true. But he said with the finger on his lips, you don't have to speak it here. If you speak it here over his heart, that just, if it comes from here, the heart, to the language, that's what you're speaking. That's what I feel when you speak your native language. It's the heart that I hear.
Yeah. Thank you for shining a light on that, because so often people feel like, oh, I don't have the tools to practice gratitude, pay attention, give my gifts, all those forms of reciprocity that Braiding Sweetgrass invites one to. But Bill's word says, oh, yes, you do. Yes, you do. There is that common wordless language of heart connection, um, that is so full of intent and richness without a single word being spoken.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think there seems to be we have way more questions for you, but there seems to be some questions coming in from our audience. So would you mind helping us out with addressing those, Robin?
I will sure try.
Okay, great. One that just popped up, and so there's probably others preceding that, but I've been trying not to pay attention to the chat room because I really totally focused in on you. So one that just popped up. Would you be willing to talk about a remedy for Wendigo sickness and the contagions it spreads? From your article, greed does not have to define our relationship to land.
When I think about that Wendigo sickness, and just for context for others, that is, a reference to the Anishinaabe monster of greed and self-centeredness, of thinking only of oneself, and certainly not of the human community and the more than human community. And the mechanism by which our people resolved the stories of the Wendigo was to banish the Wendigo. That the Wendigo was cast out from society, and shamed and never fed. The Wendigo can't come sit by the fire and stories and get the food. It is meant to be pushed away. And it is, of course, a recognition in that story of that Wendigo tendency that probably every human being has, of the self. And these are such important teachings that remind us that it's about it's about the community, and that we have to care for the whole of our community, because, well, all flourishing is mutual, right? If we don't all take care of each other, none of us will be well in the world. And so in that particular article, it is an invocation to banish the Wendigo, and to really think about our common good as opposed to our individual good. And the resonance of that message in this public health crisis could not be more stark, right? That it's not about me, it's about us. And that the wholesale celebration of that, and the opportunity to live it and enact it, is a kind of medicine all on its own.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Here's another one from Dr. Julie Kramer. Have you thought of I'm kind of curious about this too, because I was a former public school teacher, retired now. Have you thought of writing a book for younger readers? I have recommended your book for adults, but wonder if you have a recommendation for younger readers, and have you considered writing one yourself, basically?
I have been approached to do this both for like young adults and as well as for beautiful picture books, and I'd love to do it. I'd love to do it, and haven't yet found the time to. But it's definitely on my list, and one of the joys of having it be on the list is to really think carefully about what are the themes that would be in a children's book, and And the honorable harvest, the key and kin, the kinship message is something that I think would probably be there. Um, to say nothing of just the joy of paying attention. But the funny thing is, we say, well, we should have a children's book about this. Kids already know this. Kids know all of this. What child is born wanting to call the world it? That what kids do? They call the every being he and she. Right? Maybe one day they'll call them key. But kids already know this. They already feel the communion with other beings. And I've heard elders talk about that, and they say, well, of course they do, because children have just come from the creation. They haven't forgotten yet. We haven't brainwashed them into the worldview of eating the world. So I want to honor that in whatever I do, that kids already know this, and I want to tell a story in such a way that honors that knowledge which is already there, instead of trying to wash it away.
I hope this is appropriate, but it reminds me of when I was teaching. I was a physical education teacher, and I was traveling teacher, and I had to go to this school that was just there for like 2 classes or something. And I got there and they said, sorry, you don't have a classroom because we're using the gym for pictures or something, And I'm like, oh, it's okay. I'll just go outside with the kids. And that's what I usually do anyways. And well, you don't really have the playground either because it's recess time or whatever. I'm like, would it be okay to take them to the woods over there, And so we took a walk into the woods, and I told them, that we were going to go see some friends, and then they were ready to run in. I said, wait, we need to ask permission, And I said, that's if you go to your neighbor's house, you don't just walk in their door, right? What do you do first? And they said, well, we knock, And I said, well, why do you do that? And, well, to see if it's okay. And I said, well, we're going to do the same thing, Let's see if it's okay. And then when we went, so the kids are like, can we come in? Can we, like yelling out loud. And I said, well, you could do it that way. It's totally fine. I said, or you can just do it from your heart and just listen for the answer. So I said, let's just wait and see what everybody gets. And so we waited, and then the kids said, I said, did you get your answer? And they're like, yeah. I said, what did they say? Yes. And I said, did everybody get a yes? And everyone was like, yes. I said, I got a yes too. Let's go. So we went in, and then each class I had, well, actually, that's not true. I had more than a couple classes. I probably had 5 that day, because I remember taking this exercise just a little bit further every time. And we talked about hugging trees, and that trees like hugs, and that they like to be appreciated, and so progressively. But at the very end, I'm trying to make a longer story as short as I can. At the very end,
I love it.
I'll tell you another time, but I want to get to some other questions. But it was so cute, because at the end, I said we were, it was just, first we just hugged the tree in the first class, and then second class we're like, you can tell how much you appreciate it, and like I always thank it for the shade and the breeze and the place for birds to nest, and the pretty colors, and the oxygen that we get to breathe. And so you can thank them for stuff, or tell her that you love her, or whatever. And so we got done, and we circle up, and the kids are all around, and I said, so did anybody say anything to their tree? Oh yeah. What did you say? Well, I said I loved you, and then the other kids were saying what they said, and I thanked him for whatever. And then I said, and it's sort of similar to what you did. I said, so did any of your trees talk back to you? And there was complete silence, almost like your students when I mentioned that before. And then one brave little girl goes, mine did, And what did it say? I love you too. And then I said, oh, and I said, can anybody tell what kind of tree it was? Like, was it like a grandma or a grandpa tree, or was it like a, like a sister tree, like somebody that was your age, or whatever? And the kids were able to tell. And I thought maybe guys would say it was a guy tree, and girls would say it was a girl tree, or whatever. But that wasn't the case. It was just like they just knew. So to your point, these kids know. And, we have to just try and keep that and then recreate it within ourselves as we as we age.
Mm.
So thank you for saying that, and thank you for letting me share that story. But it was
Oh,
just
that's a powerful story. Yeah. Thank
Robin, if I could interject what I got from this, what you're talking about too, from the book, and I discussed it with Kate, were the words reverence and honor. And just seeing myself as a child, let's say going into church or going, that feeling you have, that's what I got from, braiding sweetgrass and braiding in the preface of braiding the sweetgrass and about the holder and the braider. And it was just, yes, that feeling. Thank you.
you. Mm. Yeah, it's right there. All we have to do is be open to it, and it's right there teaching you. Yeah.
I have another question from our audience. This one's from Pamela Hardy. Can you speak about the role of wilderness in your worldview? Ultimately, is the most respectful relationship to keep our hands off?
Mm. You just gave me a soapbox, Pamela. I'll try to be brief. I love wild places. You know that. I love wild places, but they're not wildernesses. The notion of wilderness, as it's both in the popular mind and the way it's defined in statute in this country, is a place where humans are not present, and where their mark is not present, where people are excluded because people and nature are a bad mix. If we want things to be pure and good, people need to be outside of the boundaries of that wild place. And that's such a fiction. It's a fiction that colonists brought with them from Europe. And the notion that one excludes people as a species on the planet, the idea that there are places on the land where that we are inherently bad for nature, is something I think we have to contest. Can we be bad for nature? Obviously we can, when not constrained by an ethical worldview. Of course we can. But the notion of wilderness tries to erase the fact that Native people have lived in right relationship with the landscape since time immemorial, that people can be good for the land. You think about the fire crises, the forest fire crises that we're facing all over the world. In many places, that's because human tending of wild places has been eliminated, has been suppressed. And um, and so people need to be in balance with their landscapes and giving their gifts. There's so much to say about that, and I know there are other questions, so I'll try to get off my soapbox. But the notion of wilderness doesn't take away from our love of wild places that have not been exploited, where the richness of life is just flowering. But oftentimes the richness of life is flowering because of indigenous tending of those places. And can settlers be good tenders of places and enhance biodiversity? Of course they can.
That you mentioned, because they've been tended by indigenous peoples, that they flourish. And Donna just shared an article with me about the Menominee people here in Wisconsin, and they have one of the best forestry pieces of land in the entire country, because they've been honoring the land and how it works. And they live there, they listen, it was such an amazing, beautiful piece to read.
Yeah,
So
it's a perfect example of what we're talking about. Yep.
yeah, so that kind of ties into this other question from an audience member. And I'm sorry I didn't copy and paste your name. I apologize. Your statement in the Sky Woman chapter that for all of us, becoming indigenous to a place means living as if your children's future mattered, to take care of the land as if our lives depended on it. And she he or she, sorry, to me, a descendant of the newcomers, this statement carries a world of hope. Later, you modified this, that newcomers could become naturalized, but will never really be indigenous. Also a hopeful statement, but a little different. Can you speak to the difference between the two, indigenous and naturalized?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a very deliberate transition in the book. And indigenous means you're from here. You're from here, right? That's a pretty sharp line. But so the language that I end up using is the invitation to become naturalized to place. And I use that in almost the botanical sense, that we think about species who are naturalized here. They didn't originate here. They didn't come here, but they're part of the ecosystem. They contribute. They don't disrupt the ecosystems. We call them naturalized species. They're welcome here. And in many of those naturalized species have become well-loved medicines, for example, in Native communities. And so it's an invitation to be a naturalized citizen. Of course, that also has sort of the legal definitions of a naturalized citizen, right? What it means is not to live in a place as if you're just there to take the good stuff and leave, but that you live here with intention and reciprocity with the land. The land takes care of you. It being that naturalized citizen is saying, well, I'm going to take care of the land in return.
Beautiful. I love the alliteration of all the R's that you're bringing up, reverence, relationship, reciprocity, respect. Those all tie into communion and family and interconnection. And I think that's wonderful. I'm going to just read a comment, and it's not a question. Earth has the word ear, E-A-R, in it. This speaks to the incredible power of listening, especially to more than human persons.
Beautiful. Thank you.
I love that. We are very close to the end of our time here. And so I wanted to do two things before I close us up. I want to thank everyone for being here. There is so much richness in this chat room. I'm going to save it, Robin, and I'm going to send it to you, so that you can see some of the other questions, and the comments have just been absolutely stunning that I've been able to sort of pay attention to. And so I want to remind everyone that you have a global read coming up in December with Naomi Nye, who is a best-selling poet, or award-winning poet at least. And we're really looking forward to having some time with her. And I want to thank everyone who has donated so that we can keep sending programs out to the world like this. So the Charter for Compassion thanks you, and especially for our cover sponsor today, thank you. And I want to thank my incredible co-host, who happens to be my friend and neighbor, Donna Scow, for being here with us today. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
And mostly, Robin, thank you for your amazing gift to this world by this book, by your words, and mostly by your spirit, which is so palpable in this book. And thank you for your time, and appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Robin.
It's really been a joy to be with you all, and to hear your questions and to feel your spirits in return.
Have a wonderful day, evening, or wherever you are. Thank you. Bye.
Bye all.